Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro Moros had a high-level meeting with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov this Tuesday in the framework of the meeting of the Russia-Venezuela High-Level Intergovernmental Commission held in Caracas. The World Health Organization released a report saying the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic is extremely unlikely to have been in a Wuhan lab. Niger's government has denounced an attempted coup on Tuesday night. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro Moros held a high-level meeting with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov this Tuesday in the framework of the meeting in Caracas of the Russia-Venezuela High-Level Intergovernmental Commission. Speaking following the meeting, President Maduro noted that the governments of Venezuela and Russia are advancing in the construction of their 2021 to 2031 work agenda. He highlighted that this initiative will allow Caracas and Moscow to promote new projects for mutual development and deepen the ties of brotherhood between the two nations. President Maduro thanked his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for the support provided in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and the U.S. sanctions against the country, and stressed that Russia plays a fundamental role in the construction of a pluripolar world that challenges U.S. imperialism. Also in Venezuela, during a meeting of the Russia-Venezuela High-Level Intergovernmental Commission, the Venezuelan Minister of Economy stressed the importance of the High-Level Intergovernmental Commission to promote cooperation between Venezuela and Russia.
Intergovernmental Commission, after 15 meetings held since its fourth meeting of co-presidents and as a result of the constant monitoring carried out, has been an essential forum for cooperation for both countries that has allowed us to promote and develop 20 important areas of cooperation to date, including in the financial, energy, technical, military, pharmaceutical, and transport fields, which have been progressively consolidated and strengthened.
The caravan of migrants that left the Honduran city of San Pedro Sula on Tuesday and headed to the United States was dispersed due to police blockades on the border with Guatemala. From the almost 300 migrants, very few managed to cross the border with Guatemala through blind spots, evading the controls of the security forces. The new caravan was a small group compared to the massive mobilizations that usually leave Honduras for the United States. On the route from San Pedro Sula to the border town of Corinto, the caravan was dispersed into small groups. Also, thousands of minors were detained by the authorities for not having parental permission. Sectors of the academia and the Uruguayan society research how differently the pandemic has impacted men and women. Mateo Grille has the report.
The profound inequality between women and men emerged again now during the pandemic in Uruguay. According to various reports, the social and economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic impacted differently each gender. Women not only work more in their formal employment, but also increase their unpaid workload.
In addition to being in the labor market, increasing their workload, something that happened for all women is that they have seen increase the burden of unpaid work in households because of the closure of schools, care centers, and so on. This burden of unpaid work, which has already carried out mostly by women, has increased, and a structural feature of the society.
The supply and demand of formal employment is in crisis in Uruguay, and it has been affecting men more than women, because in some sectors that were less affected by the crisis, such as education or health, women are overrepresented, but many women saw their workload significantly increased.
These are activities where women represent approximately 75% of the total employed force, a very large percentage that create the illusion that women are not that affected. We didn't look as affected because we still have jobs, because they were sectors which for different reasons saw an important increase in the workload and worsened working conditions.
Since the pandemic began, the burden of unpaid work for Uruguayan women was substantially greater than for men. Measures such as social alienation, suspension of educational activities, or working from home had to be matched with their family demands, caring for children and domestic work, activities which historically fall on women.
As we know, women have a greater dedication to caring for children, the elderly, the sick, and the adults of the house as well. And all this has also made that many women who work, for example, informal jobs from home have had to add the rest of the activities they had been doing, but in a much more important way, to extend that there were no other actors.
According to the latest Citizen Perception Survey, women were the most affected in the overall impact of the pandemic because previously they already had lower employment levels. They received lower salaries compared to their male peers, and they also took care of 75% more unpaid work than men, a reality that must be changed.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. According to a report released by the World Health Organization this Tuesday, the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic is extremely unlikely to have been in a Wuhan lab. The report came after 17 Chinese and 17 foreign experts undertook research to trace the origin of the novel coronavirus in Wuhan City in China's central Hubei province from January 14th to February 10th. The team made assessments of the likelihood of the possible pathways of COVID-19 introduction. Ruling out a lab origin, the experts concluded that the coronavirus probably emerged in bats before spreading to humans through an intermediate animal. However, the team said there was not enough evidence to identify the species or to pinpoint where the spillover of the virus from animals first occurred. The team made a series of specific recommendations, including to establish a global expert group to support joint traceability research on the suspected origin of the pandemic. Member states from the European Union will have received 107 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines by the end of this week. According to Dana Spinant, European Commission spokesperson, the 27-nation bloc has secured more than 2 billion doses through contracts with various manufacturers, but delays in the deliveries and production issues with Anglo-Swedish company AstraZeneca have considerably slowed down the rollout of vaccines in the region. Despite the delays in deliveries, the EU's Executive Commission said it was sticking to its target to vaccinate 70% of the bloc's adult population by the end of the summer. German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced that AstraZeneca's coronavirus jabs will only be authorized for general use among the over 60s, in response to reports of blood clots among younger recipients of the shots.
Document of the Commission, based on the currently available but still limited evidence and taking into account the pandemic situation, the Vaccine Commission recommends the use of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine for persons aged over 60 years old.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that the Pfizer-BioNTech firm confirmed it will move up delivery of 5 million vaccine doses to June from later in the summer. The earlier shipment period will boost the number of Pfizer doses received by the end of that month to 18 million doses. Minister of Public Services and Procurement Anita Anand said the accelerated schedule means Canada will receive about 44 million vaccine doses in total by the end of June, more than enough to every Canadian to receive at least one shot. By the end of this week, Canada will have received about 9.5 million vaccine doses from 3 manufacturers, with 3.2 million doses arriving this week alone.
D'avoir plus que 40 millions.
But by the end of this week, we will be having more than 9 million doses of vaccine to Canada to be able to speed up the process. So the work we've been doing for weeks
and weeks to increase the pace of the arrival of the vaccines continue. And that is what we announced today. By the end of the week, we will continue receiving 1 million doses from Pfizer per week. But in June, it will be 2 million doses for Pfizer, are simply trying to say that by the end of June, we will be having more than 40 million doses of vaccines to deliver to Canada.
War-torn Yemen received the first shipment of COVID-19 vaccines on Wednesday, the UN Children's Agency said, a week after the country's coronavirus committee warned of a public health emergency. The AstraZeneca doses arrived in the southern port city of Aden. Last week, Yemen's coronavirus committee urged the government to declare a public health state of emergency amid a surge in infections. It called for the implementation of a partial curfew and for the closure of all wedding halls, shopping centers and mosques outside the prayer times. Yemen has officially recorded more than 4,000 virus cases among its 30 million people, including 863 fatalities, but experts said the real toll is likely higher. South Africa will restrict the sale of alcohol and limit the size of religious and social gatherings over Easter to prevent the holiday from contributing to a new surge of COVID-19, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced on Tuesday.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which we know to be effective against the dominant variants in our country. We've secured a further 20 million doses and are finalizing this agreement with Johnson & Johnson. So you could say it's in the bag. We are also finalizing an agreement for 20 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, which requires 2 doses. Here, the country has recorded more than 1.5 million cases of coronavirus, and there have been more than 52,000 recorded deaths from COVID-19. We remember and mourn each of those lives that we have lost. As I reported when I last addressed you, South Africa has emerged from a second wave of infections. For the past 2 weeks, the number of new cases has remained relatively stable.
Homeless people in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo are being offered the CoronaVac COVID-19 jab as authorities roll out vaccinations for this priority group in the midst of the health crisis in the country.
The situation is much worse than those who have their own house because we live with a lot of people. And if it was a matter of money, I would be the last to be vaccinated because I have no financial resources. I am feeling very relieved. I recommend everyone get the vaccine and stay safe at home.
The second wave, it came with greater severity, increasing the cases much more. We believe that this new strain has further aggravated the health of people who already have comorbidities. People living on the streets already have diabetes, syphilis, HIVs, and other diseases besides alcohol and drugs, and are even more vulnerable.
And Russia announced on Wednesday the approval of the world's first coronavirus vaccine for animals, CorniVac-CoV. Its creators said the drug has a 100% efficacy rate and will start mass production on April. The Russian Federal Center for Animal Health developed the drug and said that 4 companies from several European countries are interested in buying it. Clinical trials, which began in October last year, targeted animals such as cats, dogs, red and polar foxes, and minks. Also, according to officials, 100% of the animals tested developed antibodies. Russia has so far reported 2 cases of infection in cats, and Denmark detected the virus in minks in November. And we have more stories coming up after this final topic, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Niger's government has denounced an attempted coup that was foiled on Tuesday night, days before new President Mohamed Bazoum takes office. Earlier, residents reported hearing gunfire in the middle of the night near the presidency in the capital Niamey. The alleged coup comes ahead of Bassoum's inauguration on Friday, the first elected transition in Niger's history since independence from France in 1960. Bassoum is a former interior minister and right-hand man of outgoing President Mahamadou Issoufou, who is voluntarily stepping down after 2 5-year terms, a move that has been warmly praised by France and others. On Wednesday, a long column of female teachers on motorbikes voiced their opposition to Myanmar's military takeover in a protest in the country's south. Two per bike, they carried signs saying "We want democracy" and shouted slogans as the convoy of vehicles traveled through the town of Longlon and into the surrounding countryside. Almost 2 months since the takeover that upended the country, protesters across Myanmar are still finding ways to show their opposition and evade security forces at the same time. Police and soldiers now routinely shoot to kill in a bid to crush open descent to the junta. At least 521 protesters have been killed since February the 1st, and over 2,600 have been detained. Also in Myanmar, a small group of teachers, students and engineers marched through the way on Wednesday to show that their opposition to the military takeover was undimmed. The city used to see tens of thousands on the streets when protests began, but the use of extreme violence by security forces has reduced those numbers. Even so, the demonstrations persist on a daily basis, varying gathering times to make it harder for the police to target them. 8 people so far have died during demonstrations in Dawei at the hands of the security forces. With thousands of children and families arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border in recent weeks and packing facilities, President Joe Biden has been under pressure to bring more transparency to the process. U.S. Customs and Border Protection allowed 2 journalists from the Associated Press and a crew from CBS to tour the facility in Donna, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. The facility has a capacity for 250, but more than 1,100 people were being housed in the property Tuesday. In the midst of the pandemic, no COVID-19 test was administered unless a child showed symptoms. Also, nurse practitioners also gave psychological tests, asking children if they had suicidal thoughts. All shoelaces were removed to avoid harm to anyone.
Composed of 2 tents. Both tents, the square footage is about 184,000 square foot facility. Of that, 162 is covered, meaning that is where we can actually put individuals, to include the courtyard.
In Central African Republic on Tuesday was inaugurated the re-elected President Faustin Archange Touadéra after winning the presidency last December with more than 53% of the votes. Touadéra, who was sworn in for a second 5-year term, called on citizens to foster a climate of peace and security after opponents questioning the presidential election for alleged irregularities. Re-elected president pledged to eradicate armed groups, which he says hindered the country's development. The national ruler also advocated to banish the phenomenon of corruption with the promotion of an infrastructure and also called to hold soon local elections. At the ceremony, the president was attended by his counterpart from Burundi, Evariste Ndayishimiye, and representatives of other invited states. Aruba's prime minister resigned on Tuesday after prosecutors on the Dutch Caribbean island announced an investigation into one of the parties making up her ruling coalition for suspected embezzlement of funds, the government said in a statement. The reason for the fall is a criminal investigation into the misappropriation of community funds by the government party POR. Weber Cross of the MEP says they cannot continue to govern with a coalition partner under suspicion of financial malpractice. This happened as a result of an unusual financial transaction being reported to the Financial Intelligence Unit. Likewise, the islands could go to election due to the Prime Minister's resignation. Saudi Arabia announced plans on Tuesday to pump 12 trillion rials, $4.3 trillion, in fresh investments by 2030 to boost the private sector, as the OPEC campaign pushes to diversify its oil-reliant economy. The announcement by the de facto ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman comes as the petrostate battles high unemployment and a coronavirus-triggered downturn.
The total investment that will be pumped into the national economy is 12 trillion riyals until 2030. This does not include the government spending estimated at 10 trillion riyals over the next 10 years, and private consumption spending is expected to reach 5 trillion riyals until 2030. So a total of 27 trillion riyals of $7 trillion will be spent in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia until 2030.
And several gunmen killed 3 Afghan women involved in a nationwide polio immunization program on Tuesday, a day after authorities launched a new drive against the crippling disease. According to officials, the 3 women were killed in 2 separate attacks in the eastern city of Jalalabad when they were all on duty going from house to vaccinate children. An official at the Narangad provincial governor's office confirmed the incidents. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Health said the vaccination drive had been temporarily suspended in Nangarhar. Polio has been eradicated across the world apart from Afghanistan and Pakistan. The killing of the polio workers comes after similar attacks on March the 2nd claimed by the militant Islamic State in Iraq, and also in Syria. Group left 3 female media workers dead in Jalalabad. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please find us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.